Okay, so get this. We've got a president-elect, right? But he's also, get this, a convicted criminal.
Yeah.
It's like something straight out of, House of Cards or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to dive deep today into all the legal arguments, the potential fallout. I mean, what does this mean for the future of presidential power? It's wild. And we're taking all this from a recent Fox News article about the New York v. Trump case. So,
You're absolutely right. This is unprecedented. I mean,
yeah.
it brings up all these fundamental questions
Yeah.
about, rule of law, whether it even applies to everyone, even the most powerful person in the country.
Hmm.
Like, it's really something.
Yeah. So let's rewind for a second. Donald Trump was found guilty on 34 counts of falsifying business records, all related to hush money payments. And this verdict came down before the election.
Right.
And then, boom, he wins.
Exactly.
What happens now?
Well, so his lawyer, Todd Blanche, and this is interesting, he's also Trump's pick for Deputy Attorney General, is arguing that this whole case needs to be dismissed. He's claiming that the people have spoken through the election,
Right.
and their will overrides whatever the Manhattan DA had going on in this case.
Okay, so that's a bold move. What's the legal basis for that argument?
So Blanche is citing the Constitution, the Presidential Transition Act of 1963, and then he just says the interests of justice.
Okay.
So we're going to unpack all of that. Let's start with the Constitution. He's suggesting that the president's inherent powers and responsibilities, maybe the stuff outlined in Article 2, supersedes a state-level criminal case, especially after a re-election.
Huh. Is that a common legal interpretation? It feels like he's really stretching things.
Yeah, it's a novel interpretation, to say the least. There's no direct precedent for this kind of situation. And honestly, legal scholars are divided on whether this argument even holds water. Some are saying that if you allow a president to just kind of override a criminal conviction with an election win, that sets a dangerous precedent.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a scary thought, right?
For sure.
Okay, so the Constitution's maybe a bit shaky. What about the Presidential Transition Act of 1963? How does that play into this?
Right. So the Presidential Transition Act is, designed to ensure that there's a smooth transfer of power between administrations.
Right.
Blanche argues that if you pursue this case against Trump, it'll totally disrupt the transition, create tons of instability, and hinder, his ability to govern effectively.
Okay.
But it's interesting because the act really focuses more on logistical and administrative matters, not criminal proceedings.
So he's saying that the transition should, like, trump a criminal conviction?
That seems to be the gist of his argument.
Wow.
But you could also argue that upholding the rule of law and ensuring accountability, are equally important, both for a smooth transition and public trust in the incoming administration.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's his interests of justice argument. What does that even mean in this context?
Well, he's claiming that if you sentence a newly elected president, it's going to create this huge constitutional crisis
Right.
and undermine public trust in the government. Basically, it wouldn't be good for the country.
Okay, but isn't delaying justice also harmful to public interest? It feels like he's just kind of like cherry picking what serves his client best,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's a really tricky balance, right?
Yeah, yeah.
On the one hand, you have, the principle of equal justice under the law.
Right.
But on the other hand, you know, you have this potential for like massive disruption, instability, all arising from prosecuting a sitting president.
Yeah.
It's a tough question that, that the courts are going to have to deal with, legal scholars are going to have to deal with. It's new territory.
Absolutely, yeah. And on top of all of this, they're throwing in presidential immunity now.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Right. So this argument comes from that recent 6-3 Supreme Court ruling that grants former presidents,
Right.
Significant immunity for stuff they did in office. And remember, this all stemmed from that separate federal case against Trump related to January 6th and all that election interference stuff.
So now they're trying to use that same immunity argument for this New York State case, even though the charges are completely different.
They're arguing that any further proceedings in this, hush money case need to be put on hold until all those appeals in the federal case are resolved.
Hold on. So they're trying to connect a federal case about election interference to a state case about falsified business records. It seems like they're reaching.
It's a strategic move, for sure. They're trying to use the Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity in the federal case to shield Trump from prosecution in this state case. see
Yeah.
if it works.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. It's clear that Trump's legal team is pulling out all the stops to protect him from facing any consequences. But what about the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg? How has he responded to all of this?
Right. So Bragg's in a tough spot. He's requested to stay the case until 2029.
Whoa, 2029. That's crazy. That's basically like kicking the can down the road. Is he just admitting defeat?
Not really. He
Mhm.
says he'll still oppose that motion to dismiss,
Okay.
but he is open to hearing, what the defense has to say. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to seem weak on crime,
Right.
but he also has to deal with this totally uncharted territory of, prosecuting a president.
Yeah, especially one who just got reelected. Like,
Exact.
it's crazy. I can only imagine the political pressure he's under. I mean, on one hand, you have people who see this as a chance to hold a powerful figure accountable.
Right.
But then on the other hand, you have Trump's base who see this whole thing as, like, just a political witch hunt.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Trump's team is using that to their advantage.
Right.
His spokesperson, Stephen Chung, he told Fox News that the judge's decision to even consider these arguments is, quote unquote, a decisive win.
Wow.
And a mandate from the American people to dismiss all these, again, quote unquote, witch hunt cases.
It's interesting how they're spinning this as a victory,
Yeah.
even though, like, the case is far from over. They're basically, like, skipping over the legal arguments and appealing straight to public opinion.
It's a clever tactic,
Mm.
but it's also, kind of concerning. Because if every legal challenge to Trump is just labeled a witch hunt, it really undermines the courts. It erodes public trust in the entire judicial process.
Yeah, it sets a dangerous precedent for sure. If the legal system is seen as just a political tool, that could have, like, huge consequences for our democracy.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Let's kind of switch gears for a sec and talk about the potential fallout.
Yeah.
What could this case mean for Trump's presidency if it keeps dragging on?
Well, for starters, it's just a huge distraction. Imagine being president and constantly having to deal with legal challenges and accusations, even if they eventually get dismissed. It would be a drain on time, resources, and probably affect his ability to actually govern.
And it could also create a lot of instability and uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
The constant legal battles could cast a shadow over the entire presidency, make it much harder to get anything done.
Yeah, absolutely. What about the impact on, like, public perception, though? How might this case affect people's trust in the justice system and the peaceful transfer of power, which, is kind of fundamental to democracy?
That's a great point. I mean,
Mm.
if people start to believe that the justice system is biased or that presidents are above the law, it could really hurt our democratic norms and institutions.
Yeah.
It could lead to, like, cynicism, apathy, distrust,
Yeah.
and it could make it way harder to actually deal with, the real problems the country's facing.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. This case isn't just about Trump, it's about the core principles of our government. If he can just evade accountability, what does that say about the rule of law in general?
It raises serious questions about the balance of power and, where the limits of presidential immunity actually are.
Yeah.
Could future presidents use this as, like, a blueprint to shield themselves from scrutiny or legal consequences? Something to think about.
It's almost like we're at a constitutional crossroads here. The outcome of this case could totally reshape how the executive branch and the judiciary interact.
I think you're right. We could see a more assertive Supreme Court, one that's willing to rein in presidential power.
Right.
Or we could see a more emboldened executive branch that's testing the boundaries of its authority.
Right.
This case could really be a turning point for how we define presidential power and accountability.
That's a lot. This is heavy stuff, right? We've got a convicted president saying his reelection just, like, wipes his conviction clean. We've got a potential constitutional crisis over presidential immunity. And we have a justice system under immense scrutiny and political pressure.
It's a lot to unpack, yeah.
So where do we even go from here? Yeah, it really feels like uncharted territory. This whole case is like this tangled web of legal arguments, political maneuvering, and the consequences for democracy are huge. What stands out to you as the most significant thing here?
Honestly, I think the big issue is this potential expansion of presidential immunity. Like, if the courts ultimately uphold some broad interpretation that just shields presidents from accountability for things that are totally unrelated to their job, it could really change the balance of power and the future of American democracy,
Yeah, you're right. The implications are huge. We always thought no one is above the law.
Right.
But this case is putting that to the test.
Yeah, it's making us rethink some pretty basic assumptions about the presidency and the rule of law. Like, how much power should one person have, and how do we make sure that power is kept in check?
And we also have to think about the political side of things too, right?
Hmm.
No matter what happens in the courts, this case has already made the divisions in our society even worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Trump supporters, they'll probably see this as just another attack, proof of that deep state conspiracy or another witch hunt.
Right, right.
But his opponents, they'll see any leniency as a total betrayal of justice and a really bad precedent for future presidents.
So what should we be watching for as this all unfolds? Like, what are the key things that will decide the outcome and what happens next?
Okay, so first, pay attention to the legal stuff, especially the arguments about presidential immunity. See how the courts interpret the laws and the precedents. Are they going to expand immunity or are they going to draw a hard line? And second, watch the political landscape. Will this fire up Trump's base and make those partisan divisions even worse? Or will it actually push people to demand reform and accountability?
It seems like this is one of those cases where the impact goes way beyond just the people involved, It's really out the future of our democracy.
Yeah, you put it perfectly. It's a reminder that our system of government, it's fragile. We always need to be watching, protecting it from people who want to take advantage or undermine it.
Well, this deep dive has been a lot. It's a ton of information, thought-provoking questions, and it's clear this case is far from over. It's really high stakes.
Yeah, we'll definitely be watching to see how it plays out. It's a defining moment, and the choices we make now are going to have a real impact down the road.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll keep following the story as it develops and bring you more analysis and insights. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. I'm Seth.